Welcome to my channel. Please like this video and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the story. Let's begin. Nolan's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel as he pulled into the driveway. The house before him, once familiar, now seemed strangely unfamiliar. He turned off the engine and sat, staring at the front door. Another late night, he muttered, noticing Sienna's car parked carelessly. Another work emergency. I bet he trudged inside, weighed down by his growing suspicions. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Nolan ascended the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He paused by his children's rooms and peeked in. 8-year-old Ethan and 6-year-old Lily slept peacefully, unaware of the turmoil brewing in their father's mind. His gaze lingered on their faces, noting features that always felt oddly unfamiliar to him. Pushing aside his unsettling thoughts, he moved toward the master bedroom. Sienna lay curled on her side of the bed, her back to the door. Nolan quietly changed and slipped under the covers without a word. As he stared at the ceiling, Sienna's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He glanced over just in time to catch a glimpse of the screen before it dimmed. A text from Donovan flashed briefly. The words, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," burned in Nolan's mind. Sleep evaded him that night as doubts and suspicions swirled in his thoughts like a storm. The next morning, Nolan sat at the breakfast table, watching Sienna hurriedly move around the kitchen. She looked flawless, as always, her designer outfit neatly pressed, not a hair out of place. "Another work trip?" Nolan asked, keeping his tone neutral. Sienna barely glanced at him as she poured coffee into her travel mug. "Yeah, big client meeting in Chicago. I'll be back Friday." "That's the third trip this month," Nolan remarked, stirring his cereal absently. "Well, someone's got to bring home the bacon," Sienna quipped, flashing a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She leaned down to kiss the kids goodbye, and Nolan couldn't help but notice how different they appeared from him. Ethan's skin was slightly darker, his hair curlier, and Lily's features echoed someone else's. "I'll call you tonight," Sienna said, pecking Nolan on the cheek before heading out. As the door closed behind her, Nolan's composed demeanor crumbled. He buried his face in his hands, crushed by the weight of his suspicions. Later that day, Nolan found himself in a pharmacy, staring at a row of DNA testing kits. His hand trembled as he reached for one, the decision feeling both monumental and terrifying. At home, he meticulously followed the instructions, swabbing the inside of his cheek. He did the same for Ethan and Lily, telling them it was a fun science experiment. As he sealed the samples and prepared to mail them, a mix of dread and determination settled in his stomach. Weeks passed, each day an agonizing wait. Sienna's work trips continued, her late-night phone calls grew more frequent. Nolan watched her closely, noting every secretive smile and hushed conversation. Finally, the email arrived. Nolan's heart raced as he opened the attachment, scanning the results. The world seemed to shift beneath him as he read the words that confirmed his worst fear: probability of paternity 0%. African ancestry detected in child samples, absent in the father's DNA. Nolan stared at the screen, his vision blurring. The truth he had feared was now undeniable. The children he had loved and raised were not his, and Sienna had betrayed him in the worst possible way. As the shock began to wear off, anger simmered inside Nolan. His mind raced, piecing together details he had previously ignored. Donovan, Sienna's boss, the charming African-American businessman who was always around. The lingering looks, the inside jokes, the unnecessary business dinners. 15 years, their entire marriage had been built on lies. Nolan's phone buzzed a text from his sister, Amanda. "Hey, want to grab lunch? You seem down lately." He stared at the message, a new suspicion forming. With shaking fingers, he dialed Amanda's number. "Hey, Nolan, did you get my text?" Amanda's cheerful voice grated on his raw nerves. Nolan's voice was eerily calm. "I need you to be honest with me. Did you know about Sienna and Donovan?" The silence on the other end was deafening. "Nolan, how did you find out?" Amanda's voice was small, guilt-ridden. Nolan's grip on the phone tightened. "So you knew. How long?" "We thought it was just a fling at first. We didn't want to hurt you." "Who else knows?" Nolan's voice rose. Amanda hesitated, and her silence spoke volumes. "Mom and Jake." Nolan felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. His own mother and best friend had known about Sienna's infidelity and kept it from him. "How could you?" He snarled into the phone. All of you, you've been lying to me for years. Nolan, please. We were trying to protect you. Protect me? By letting me live a lie. By watching me raise another man's children. Nolan's voice cracked with anguish. The kids. Oh God. Nolan, I'm so sorry. Save it, Nolan snapped. I don't want to hear it. Don't call me again. He tossed the phone aside, the betrayal cutting deep, leaving him feeling hollow and alone. That evening, when Sienna returned from her trip, Nolan was waiting. He sat in the darkened living room, the DNA results clutched in his hand. Nolan, Sienna called out, flicking on the lights. She jumped when she saw him. Jesus, you scared me. What are you doing sitting in the dark? Nolan looked up, his eyes cold. We need to talk, Sienna. She frowned, setting down her bags. What's wrong? You look upset. Upset? Nolan laughed bitterly. That's an understatement. He stood, crossing the room, and handed her the DNA results without a word. Sienna's face paled as she read the document. Nolan, I can explain. Explain. Nolan's voice was dangerously low. Explain how you've been sleeping with your boss for 15 years. Explain how our entire marriage is a lie. Explain how the children I've raised aren't even mine. Tears filled Sienna's eyes. Please, Nolan, it's not what you think. Not what I think. Nolan exploded. The DNA doesn't lie, Sienna. Ethan and Lily aren't my children. They're Donovan's, aren't they? Sienna's silence confirmed everything Nolan had feared. Nolan's voice cracked with a mix of rage and agony as he confronted Sienna. How could you do this to me? 15 years, Sienna. 15 years of lies and betrayal, he demanded. Sienna, her eyes brimming with tears, reached out to him. I'm so sorry, Nolan. I never wanted this. I love you. It was a mistake, she sobbed. Nolan flinched away from her touch. A mistake? A 15-year affair isn't a mistake, Sienna. It's a decision you made every day to deceive and betray me, he snarled. Please, Sienna pleaded, we can fix this. Think of the kids. Nolan let out a bitter laugh. The kids? They're not even mine, remember? You made sure of that, he spat. Sienna collapsed onto the floor, her sobs filling the space. I'm sorry, Nolan. Please, give me another chance. I'll end it with Donovan, I swear. We can start over. But Nolan's icy voice cut through her desperation. There's no starting over. You destroyed everything we had. There's nothing left, he said. His decision final? I want a divorce, Sienna? It's over. No, Sienna cried, scrambling to her feet and grabbing his arm. Don't do this. We can fix it. I'll do anything. Nolan shook her off, his gaze hard. There's nothing to fix. Our marriage died the day you decided to betray me. I just didn't realize it until now. He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. I'll be staying at a hotel. Have your lawyer contact mine. He turned to look at her one last time, his eyes cold and unforgiving. And Sienna, he added, don't ever expect me to forgive you for this. Some betrayals are beyond forgiveness. With that, he walked out, leaving Sienna sobbing on the floor. As Nolan drove away, the weight of the betrayal bore down on him. His wife, his family, his best friend, they had all lied to him. His grip tightened on the steering wheel, anger and resolve flooding through him. They thought they could shield Sienna, that he would simply forgive and forget. But he was going to show them how wrong they were. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. By the time Nolan checked into the hotel, his mind was already devising a plan. They wanted to play games? Fine, he would be the one to decide how it ended, and he would make sure Sienna paid for every lie, every betrayal over the past 15 years. Sitting in the dimly lit hotel room, the light from his laptop cast a pale glow on his face. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he quietly transferred funds from their joint accounts to new ones that only he could access. The clock read 3:27 a.m., but sleep was the last thing on his mind. A notification lit up his phone, another missed call from Sienna. He barely glanced at it before silencing the device. Let her sit in her guilt and fear, he thought. This was just the beginning. At dawn, Nolan headed to his office, determined to start liquidating their shared properties without raising suspicion. As he walked into the building, he forced a smile. Good morning, Nolan chirped his assistant. Your wife called earlier. She said it was urgent. Nolan's smile never faltered. Thanks, Sarah. I'll handle it later in his office. He made a series of calls to realtors and financial advisors, each move carefully calculated. By lunchtime, everything was in motion, but His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mother. His jaw clenched as he answered. "Nolan, honey," she began, her voice hesitant. "We need to talk about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about," Nolan replied coldly. "You lied to me for years, watched me raise another man's children. Knowing the truth, we were trying to protect you," she pleaded. "We all were. You were wrong," Nolan snapped. "And don't call me again. I'm done with all of you." He hung up, his hand trembling with suppressed anger. Over the following weeks, Nolan maintained a facade of normalcy, going to work, avoiding calls from friends and family, while secretly executing his plans. Sienna's desperate attempts to reach him were ignored. One evening, as Nolan left the office, he ran into Jake, his so-called best friend. Jake's face paled. "Nolan," he began, his voice shaky. "We need to talk." Nolan's gaze was ice cold. "I have nothing to say to you." "Come on, man," Jake pleaded. "I know you're angry, but let me explain." What? Nolan's voice was low, seething with anger. "How you let me live a lie for 15 years. How you pretended to be my friend while hiding the truth." Jake winced. "We were trying to protect you," he stammered. "Protect me?" Nolan scoffed bitterly. "By letting me raise another man's kids? By watching Sienna make a fool of me?" "Please." Nolan. Jake reached out, but Nolan stepped back. "We're done," he said flatly. "Don't ever speak to me again." He walked away, leaving Jake standing there, speechless. When Nolan arrived home, Sienna was waiting for him. Her eyes were swollen, her hair disheveled. She leapt up as he walked in. "Nolan, please," she begged. "We need to talk about this. About us. About the children." "There is no us," Nolan replied coldly. "And they're not my children. Remember?" Sienna flinched. "They love you, Nolan. You're the only father they've ever known." "Stop it," Nolan snapped. "Don't use them to manipulate me." "I'm not," Sienna insisted, tears streaming down her face. "I just want you to understand it wasn't all a lie. I do love you." Nolan laughed, the sound harsh and cold. "Love? You don't even know what love is. If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me for 15 years. "It was a mistake," Sienna cried. "I never meant for it to go on this long. Donovan, he threatened to ruin your career if I ended things." "Save your excuses," Nolan interrupted. "I'm done with your lies." Sienna reached out, her eyes pleading. "Please, Nolan, give me another chance. For the sake of our family." "We're not a family," Nolan replied, his voice void of emotion. "And soon you'll have nothing." Sienna's eyes widened in fear. "What do you mean?" Nolan smiled coldly. "You'll find out soon enough." He turned and walked out, ignoring her desperate cries. Months passed, filled with legal meetings and financial maneuvers. Nolan worked relentlessly, ensuring that every detail was perfect. He watched from the sidelines as Sienna's world unraveled. Donovan, the man she had betrayed him for, began to distance himself. Nolan had made sure the right rumors reached the right ears, hinting at financial scandals and ethical violations. It wasn't long before Donovan faced an internal investigation. Meanwhile, Sienna's frantic attempts to contact Nolan increased, her messages growing more desperate by the day. He saved everyone, listening to her pleas with grim satisfaction. Let her feel a fraction of the pain she had caused him. Finally, after months of careful planning, Nolan was ready. He arranged to meet Sienna at their old house, now empty and lifeless. When Nolan arrived, Sienna was already there, pacing anxiously in the living room. "Nolan," she breathed, a sense of relief washing over her voice. "Thank God. I've been trying to contact you for months. We need to discuss." "No." Nolan interrupted sharply. "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to end this." He pulled a stack of papers from his briefcase and handed them over. Sienna's hands trembled as she took the documents. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Divorce papers," Nolan replied coldly, "and documentation of all our assets. Or rather, what are now my assets?" Sienna's eyes widened as she leafed through the pages. "What? This can't be real. The house, the cars, the savings, it's all gone." Nolan's smile was predatory. "Not gone, just no longer yours." But how she gasped, disbelief flooding her features. "Did you really think I'd let you get away with betraying me?" Nolan's voice was as cold as ice. "While you were busy trying to save our marriage, I was making sure you'd lose everything," he added. Tears began to spill from Sienna's eyes. "Nolan, please, you can't do this. Think about the kids," she begged. "Don't," Nolan growled. "Don't use them against me again. They're not my children, remember? They're just another piece of your deception." Sienna collapsed to the floor, sobbing. "What am I supposed to do? Where can I go?" she cried. Nolan looked down at her without a trace of sympathy. "That's not my concern anymore," he said coldly. "You made your choices, Sienna. Now you get to live with the consequences." As he turned to leave, Sienna scrambled to her feet, grabbing his arm. "Wait, what about Donovan? He'll help me, he loves me," Nolan laughed, a joyless, harsh sound. "Donovan? You might want to check the news. Last I heard, he's facing some serious charges at work. I doubt he's in any position to help you now." The color drained from Sienna's face. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I didn't do anything," Nolan said with a casual shrug. "Karma's a thing, isn't it?" He shook her grip off and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned to look at her one last time. "Goodbye, Sienna. I hope it was worth it." With that, he left, shutting the door on 15 years of lies and deceit. As Nolan got into his car, he could hear Sienna's sobs coming from inside the house, but he felt nothing, no remorse, no sorrow. Just a cold sense of satisfaction. He drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of his old life. A new chapter awaited him, free from the burdens of betrayal and deceit. As he hit the highway, Nolan allowed himself a small smile. Sienna, Donovan, his family, they had all underestimated him. They thought they could control him with their lies, manipulate him with their so-called concern. But he had shown them. He had taken everything from them, just as they had from him. An eye for an eye, a life for a life. The road stretched out before him, limitless and full of opportunity. Nolan pressed down on the gas pedal, leaving the past behind. He was free now, free to rebuild his life on his own terms. If there was one lesson Nolan had taken from this, it was that he would never allow anyone to betray him again. He was done with trust and done with forgiveness. From now on, he would look out for no one but himself. As the sun began to set on the horizon, Nolan continued to drive, his heart hardened, his resolve firm. The man he used to be had vanished like a fading mirage. In his place stood someone new, stronger, unyielding, and determined never to be a victim again. Nolan's transformation was complete. 5 years had passed since Nolan had walked away from his former life. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his sleek, modern apartment in a busy city far from the memories of his past. Nolan stood by the windows, sipping his morning coffee, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. His phone buzzed from the kitchen counter, displaying a message from his assistant at the tech startup he now managed. Meeting with investors moved to 2 p.m. Projections look good. We're on track to close the deal. Nolan smiled. His new life was everything he had worked for: successful, calm, and most importantly, on his own terms. As he prepared for the day ahead, brief flashes of his old life surfaced in his mind: the betrayals, the heartbreak, the anger. But all of it seemed distant now. He had poured all that pain into building something new, something entirely his own. The doorbell rang, breaking his thoughts. Nolan frowned, not expecting anyone. Opening the door, he found a delivery man holding a large envelope. "Nolan Reeves?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me," Nolan replied, taking the envelope. After closing the door, he examined the package. It had no return address. A sense of unease crept over him as he tore it open. Inside was a stack of newspaper clippings and a handwritten note. Nolan's blood ran cold as he recognized the handwriting. The note read, "You won. I hope you're happy." It was from Sienna. His hands trembled as he sifted through the clippings. Headlines leapt out at him: tech mogul Donovan Richards indicted for fraud, prominent businessman faces 20 years in prison, Richards Corporation files for bankruptcy. Nolan sat down heavily on the couch, his mind racing. He had known about Donovan's downfall. After all, he had orchestrated it. But seeing the full scope of the destruction laid out before him was jarring. He picked up another clipping, this one from a local paper. Local woman loses home in divorce settlement. The article detailed Sienna's fall from grace, how she had lost everything in the divorce, been forced to move in with her aging parents. Diane struggled to find work due to her tarnished reputation. Nolan clenched his jaw and set the clippings aside. He didn't regret what he had done. Sienna and Donovan deserved every bit of it. But the finality of it all hit him harder than he had expected. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Rachel, the woman he had been seeing for a few months. "Dinner tonight? I've got a surprise for you," Nolan smiled, pushing away thoughts of the past. He had a new life now, a better life, and he wasn't about to let old ghosts haunt him. "Sounds great. Can't wait," he texted back. The day flew by in a blur of meetings and calls. By the time evening came, Nolan had almost forgotten about the package from Sienna. He met Rachel at their favorite restaurant, a cozy Italian spot with the best pasta in the city. She greeted him with a warm smile and a kiss. "So what's the surprise?" Nolan asked as they sat down. Rachel's eyes sparkled. "Well, remember that job I applied for? The one in London?" Nolan nodded, excitement and apprehension building inside him. "I got it," Rachel exclaimed. "And I want you to come with me." Nolan's mind raced. London, a fresh start, a chance to build something new with someone he truly cared about. "Rachel, that's incredible," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I'm so proud of you," but she asked, sensing his hesitation. Nolan sighed. It's a big decision. My company, my life here." Rachel squeezed his hand. "I know, and I'm not asking for an answer right now. Just think about it, okay?" Nolan nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. Tonight, let's just celebrate your success." As they dined and conversed, Nolan's thoughts kept drifting back to the package from Sienna. He had believed that part of his life was behind him, but had it truly ended? The following morning he woke up early, his sleep troubled by uneasy dreams. Making his way to the kitchen, he brewed a strong pot of coffee. As he waited for it to brew, his eyes landed on the envelope from Sienna, still sitting on the coffee table where he had left it. With a sigh, he picked it up again, sifting through the contents. This time, a small photo slipped out, a picture of Ethan and Lily, the children he once thought were his. They were older now, teenagers. Ethan had Donovan's strong jawline, while Lily's eyes were undeniably Sienna's. A lump formed in Nolan's throat. Despite everything, despite knowing they weren't his, he couldn't help but wonder about them. How had the last 5 years treated them? Did they resent him for leaving? His phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. The number was unfamiliar. Nolan hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," a voice he hadn't heard in years greeted him. "Nolan, it's Amanda, your sister." Nolan's grip on the phone tightened. "How did you get this number?" he demanded. "That doesn't matter," Amanda replied quickly. "Nolan, you need to come home. It's about Sienna." Nolan's voice turned cold. "Sienna is no longer my problem. Whatever it is, she can handle it herself. She's at your old house," Amanda pressed, urgency in her voice. She's not well. She's threatening to hurt herself. Please, we don't know what to do." Nolan's mind raced. A part of him wanted to hang up, to sever this last tie to his old life. But another part, a part he thought he had buried long ago, stirred with concern. "Why are you calling me?" he asked, his tone harsh. "Call the police if she's threatening to hurt herself." "We already did," Amanda replied, her voice breaking. "But she's asking for you. She says she won't speak to anyone else. Please, Nolan, I know you hate us all, but please." Nolan closed his eyes, battling the conflict raging inside him. After a long pause, he spoke. "Text me the address." "I'll be there in a few hours." He hung up before Amanda could respond, already regretting his decision. Yet he knew this was something he needed to do to close this chapter of his life for good. The flight back to his hometown was a blur. Nolan's mind churned with a mixture of emotions: anger, resentment, and a reluctant sense of duty. As the plane touched down, he braced himself for what lay ahead. A rental car awaited him at the airport, and as he drove through the familiar streets of his old neighborhood, memories flooded back. He passed the park where he used to take the kids, the ice cream shop where they celebrated the first day of school, and the restaurant where he had proposed to Sienna all those years ago. His stomach churned as he pulled up to his old house. Amanda was on the porch, her face pale and drawn. She hurried toward him as he got out of the car. "Thank God you're here," she said, reaching out to hug him. Nolan stepped back, avoiding her embrace. "Where is she?" he asked coldly. Amanda's face fell at his tone. "She's inside, in the living room. She hasn't moved since she arrived." Nolan gave a curt nod and brushed past her, walking into the house. The interior was just as he remembered it, but now it felt hollow, devoid of the life and love he once thought it held. He found Sienna curled up on the couch in the living room. She looked smaller, diminished. Her once sleek hair was now unkempt, and her designer clothes had been replaced by a worn-out sweater and faded jeans. She glanced up as he entered, her eyes wide with surprise. "Nolan." "You came," she whispered. "I'm here," Nolan replied flatly. "What do you want?" Sienna struggled to sit up, her movements shaky and disjointed. "I needed to see you," she stammered, "to tell you I'm sorry, for everything." Nolan's jaw tightened. "Sorry doesn't fix anything, Sienna." Not after what you did, I know, Sienna whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I know it doesn't. But I had to say it. You need to know everything fell apart after you left. That was the point, Nolan responded coldly. Sienna flinched at his words. Donovan left me as soon as the scandal broke. He said he couldn't risk being associated with me. And the kids, oh God, Nolan, the kids hate me. They blame me for breaking up our family. Nolan's voice was sharp as a knife. There was never a family, Sienna. It was all a lie. No, Sienna shook her head, her voice frantic. It wasn't all a lie. I loved you, Nolan. I still do. What I did was unforgivable, but my love for you, for our family, that was real. Nolan let out a bitter laugh. Love? You don't know the meaning of the word. If you loved me, you wouldn't have betrayed me for 15 years. Sienna sobbed, her body shaking with grief. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging you, Nolan. Help me. I have nothing left, no money, no home, no family. I don't know what to do anymore. For a brief moment, Nolan felt a flicker of sympathy, but he crushed it quickly. And whose fault is that, Sienna? You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. He turned to leave, but Sienna's next words froze him in his tracks. The kids ask about you, she said quietly. They miss you, especially Lily. She still calls you Dad, you know. Nolan's hand paused on the doorknob, and he turned slowly, his eyes hard. Don't you dare try to manipulate me with them again. I'm not, Sienna insisted, her voice desperate. I'm telling you the truth. They love you, Nolan. You're the only father they've ever known. Stop, Nolan growled. They're not my children. They're just another part of your betrayal, Sienna crumbled, her sobs echoing in the empty room. Please, Nolan, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to take me back. I need help. I don't know where else to turn. Nolan stood there, torn between walking away and the faint stirrings of pity. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. I can't help you, Sienna, not in the way you want, but I can do this. He pulled out his phone and dialed quickly. Jake, it's Nolan. I need a favor. Is there an entry-level position at your firm? Nothing special? Just something to get started? Yeah, it's for Sienna. He ignored the shock and gratitude on Sienna's face as he finished the call. This is all you get, he said firmly, turning to her. A chance to get back on your feet. What you do with it is up to you. But don't ever contact me again. Don't ever try to use the kids to reach me again. This is the end, Sienna, the real end. Sienna nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Nolan. I don't deserve this, no, you don't, Nolan agreed, his voice cold. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it so I can walk away knowing I'm nothing like you. Nothing like any of you. With that, he turned and walked out, ignoring Amanda's attempts to speak to him. He got into his car and drove away without looking back. As Nolan headed toward the airport, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had faced his past, confronted the ghosts that haunted him, and emerged stronger. He had shown mercy without forgiveness, found closure without reconciliation. His phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. Have you thought about London? Nolan smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in years. He pulled over and typed his response, yes. Let's do it together. As he hit send, Nolan knew he was closing one chapter and opening another. The past was behind him now, truly and completely. The future, full of possibilities, lay ahead. He started the car, pointing it toward the airport, toward his new life. The man who had entered that house, still bound to the past, was gone. In his place was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone ready to embrace the future. Nolan Reeves had disappeared once again, but this time it was on his own terms, and this time it was final.